Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Well, yet another list of 5 upcoming RPGs that could be worth our time. This became a monthly series on the channel, and if this is your first time watching, I suggest checking out the full playlist where you can find the previous videos in the series. We featured over 35 new games up to this point, so if you're wondering about a certain title that you might not see on this particular list, there is a possibility I already covered it before. Anyway, in this video I have some brand new titles that I never talked about on the channel before. And all of these games look like they could be really fun, but needless to say that we don't know that for sure until we can actually try them out. However, I did check out a couple of playable demos for these games, and I'll talk about that experience as well. So let's not waste any more time. Number 5. Ardenfall. Ardenfall is an open world RPG developed by a small team from Seattle called Spellcast Studios. The game is inspired by Morrowind and Fallout New Vegas, and it has been in development for about 4 years. Everything that I could see so far about this game looks really promising. The low poly aesthetic will probably turn some people away, but if you don't have a problem with that, you might find this game really interesting. It looks like it has a really solid RPG foundation, judging from all the info that I could find about the game. Ardenfall has a couple of joinable factions, a very strong dialogue system with choices and consequences, multiple ways to solve quests, and a ton of lore according to developers. The gameplay is focused on the first-person perspective, but I think there is an option for a third-person camera as well, as we can see in some of these clips. But the game is being presented as a first-person RPG, so I think that perspective is the default option. A lot of comments I get on these videos is about first-person RPGs, or more specifically the lack of them. New first-person RPGs are definitely rare to find, although we did feature a couple of them recently, like Return to Nagrim for example. Anyway, the gameplay in Ardenfall is reliant on a quick slot bar, which allows you to use items and spells with a press of a button. While the gameplay looks really simplistic, it seems like it has a lot of depth behind it. That means that we can expect to see a lot of RPG mechanics and features in this game. One of the most common questions that I get when uncovering upcoming RPGs is the character creation menu. Ardenfall does have a character creation menu, and we can see a glimpse of it in the newest devlog video on their channel. You can select abilities, traits, and customize the look of your character. It seems like NPCs will have a pretty decent combat AI that will try to react to what the player is doing rather than being completely scripted. So for example, if you start casting fireballs, the enemy will try to cast a fire shield sometimes. I think that every RPG should have at least some form of reactive NPC behavior in combat, so this is a welcoming feature. In one of the previous devlog videos, we could also see the ability to play as a stealthy character, and there is a simple crime system that goes with it. So yeah, pretty much all playstyles that you would expect to find in an RPG is available. When it comes to the story and the setting, there are 3 separate families that you will interact with. Long ago, all of these families used to live together as a single tribe, but nowadays they pretty much hate each other. However, none of them can survive on their own, and they are forced to cooperate. Sako family are mostly fishermen and cooks, Akiro family are guards and hunters, and the people from the temple are monks who try to maintain the peace between these 3 families. The player is obviously in the middle of all of this, and you will have to make some important decisions as you progress through the storyline. The ability to solve quests in multiple ways is music to my ears. Actually, the whole dialogue and the quest system looks really extensive. They claim to have a fully dynamic dialogue system with a lot of branching options. This questing system is basically the main focus of the game, and it should have a lot of options for role-playing. Dynamic dialogue system means that player options will depend on various things, like race, gender, weather, stats, background, locations, and so on. Honestly, all of this sounds great, and I can't wait to see more info about the game. If Spellcast Studios will manage to implement all of these features, and if the game works as intended, I think we're going to get a pretty solid open world RPG. We'll have to wait and see, but definitely keep our eye on this one. Number 4. Sovereign. Sovereign is an upcoming open-world action/adventure RPG. According to the Steam page, Sovereign is heavily focused on character customization through appearance and statistics. That means that you'll be able to stack different armor pieces on top of each other and create your own armor set basically. You can mix and match armor pieces however you want in this game. In one of the devlog videos for the game, the developer said this kind of armor system feels really enjoyable from the player perspective, And I totally agree. The only RPG on top of my mind that had a similar armor system is obviously Morrowind. And I think a lot of people enjoy the armor system in that game and how you could stack different armor pieces on top of each other. So if it's any similar to Morrowind armor system, sign me up. I think the main reason why we don't see similar armor stacking system in other RPGs, it's because it's obviously a lot harder to do. To be honest, it seems like a nightmare for whoever is developing the system. But I'm really glad to hear that this guy is approaching this system from the player perspective, which can tell you a lot about the general idea for this game. It would be a lot easier to stick with the traditional armor system with a couple of different slots. It's not like there is anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying I would definitely love to see more RPGs with armor stacking system. Anyway, we are talking way too much about the single feature of this game, but there is a big focus on it, so I wanted to talk about it first. When it comes to the gameplay or combat in particular, Sovereign has a directional system for attacks, and even in this early stage of development, it looks pretty decent. Bear in mind that some of the footage you are watching is from the old devlog videos from 1.5 years ago. With each new devlog video on their official channel for the game, you can see some clear improvements on all fields. Anyway, the directional melee combat system can be extremely rewarding if it's done correctly. Older Mount & Blade games are the best example how you can make the directional combat feel really damn good without a big budget. There is no way for me to tell how the combat feels in Sovereign, obviously, but it definitely looks fun and engaging. To make it even better, there is a dismemberment system in the game as well. I think this feature can always give the melee combat a greater sense of impact. The ragdolls is another thing which can make the melee combat feel a bit more impactful. We can see how the enemies will ragdoll in certain situations, like when the player performs some abilities. One of them is the kick ability that the player and the enemies can use to break the blocking stance, and it can send characters on the ground. Directional attacks make the characters ragdoll appropriately, which looks and probably feels great. All of this combined make the melee combat seem like it can be a lot of fun. Besides the melee combat, we can see some ranged as well as some stealth action. Speaking of stealth, one really interesting piece of information about this mechanic caught my attention. The game will have different playable races, and one of them is dwarves. Their stealth ability is by default stronger compared to other races in the game because of their height. In other words, they can hide behind things more easily. I don't know if this is related to the perception ability or how it actually affects the NPC detection meter, but it's definitely great to see. I always thought that RPGs should consider things like this, but the majority of them don't. Probably because technical limitations, I guess. Dragon's Dogma is on top of my mind when it comes to similar features. You have the ability to squeeze through some tight passages if you have a small frame. So I'm really happy to see this feature in the game, even though the developer said he discovered it on accident. But hey, I'm willing to bet that some of the best features in various games are discovered in the same manner. When it comes to magic, we don't have any actual gameplay footage yet, except for the part with magical arrows. But this is just a placeholder animation for the fireball spell. Unfortunately, there is no information about the story of the game, at least I couldn't find it anywhere. I really hope the next devlog video will have some story related info and maybe something about the quests. We can see the world map in one of the clips and some footage of the first city, so there's that as well. Sovereign is another game on the list that has a highly stylized look, and just like with the previous game, that could turn some people away. But I really hold the gameplay in high regard, and I personally don't care that much about the looks if the gameplay is fun and engaging. That being said, I don't think that Sovereign looks bad, the environments are pretty nice. On the other hand, character models have a really simplistic, faceless look. Literally. But anyway, I'm really curious about the final version of the game. I'll definitely try it out when I get the chance. Number 3. Spark in the Dark. Spark in the Dark is a brutal isometric action RPG. And when I say brutal, I really mean it because this game doesn't play around. It's a very atmospheric game with really creepy vibes, and combined with the hardcore gameplay, it targets a really niche audience, I would say. It's not your typical hack and slash Diablo-like RPG, even though it might seem like that from a distance. There is a free demo available on Steam that you can try out for yourself, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're into these types of games. It's a very straightforward demo. You get to choose between 4 classes and a couple of different paths, which are basically the difficulty setting. Although I didn't see a huge difference between these 3 options in the demo, to be honest. No matter what you pick, it's going to be brutal. The game doesn't seem to be too heavy on the story. You get a short background story about each of these characters before and after you start the game, and you can loot a lot of notes while playing. You will find a lot of interactable objects with a description that you can read. It's a good way to enhance the environmental storytelling, and Spark in the Dark seems like it's going to rely on that aspect a lot when it comes to the story in general. The atmosphere that the game creates is just amazing. It's dark and unsettling. Combined with a minimalistic UI, the game creates a really immersive experience. You can hear the monsters before you actually see them in the dark, which can be really creepy. And speaking about the dark, it's actually an important mechanic in the game. If you stay too long in the dark, you'll slowly start to lose health. You either have to find a lamp somewhere or use your own lantern if you manage to loot it. But since the fuel is limited, you'll have to conserve it. I mean, you don't have to do it, but it's smart. Light will regenerate your health, but it won't stop the monsters from coming. Overall, I like how this works, although the dark can be a bit too aggressive, especially if you don't have the lantern. The combat is slow and methodical, and it requires your full attention because if you die, you have to start over. Now, you might think this is a roguelike RPG, but besides this particular feature and the procedurally generated map, there are no other roguelike mechanics in the game that you would expect to see. The character progression works like in traditional RPGs. You have different skills that will increase upon use, and you get new equipment by looting enemies. It's more of a hardcore game mode that you can see in Diablo-like RPGs, rather than being a roguelike experience. That's kinda contradictory to what I said before. It's not your typical hack and slash Diablo-like RPG, even though it might seem like that from a distance. Yeah, anyway, that's just how it feels to me, and the developers are certainly not promoting the game as a roguelike. I just wanted to clear that up. While the combat feels pretty good, it definitely needs a lot more work. Especially when it comes to the dodge button, because in the demo you can only dodge forward and backwards. It doesn't feel really smooth, and the game should have the option to dodge sideways, which would be a lot more helpful. You can use a couple of different tactics to defeat multiple enemies, not just by using your skills and weapons. These dungeons have a lot of traps, but you can use them against your enemies. There is friendly fire as well, so enemies can hit each other, but it's not so easy to pull off. Your movement and your dodging is affected by the weight of your equipment, so yeah, it's a Souls-like mechanic. I think one-handed weapons are kinda inferior to heavier weapons because they lack the stagger mechanic. That could also be improved in the final game, I guess. Sound effects are mostly decent, and it's really satisfying when you kill someone. This is one of those games that you can easily rage quit, but you will get the itch to play it again almost instantly. Don't ask me how I know that. Anyway, I highly recommend this demo, and I'm really curious about the final version of the game. Number 2. Stray Blade. Stray Blade is an action RPG where you play as a rogue adventurer. You know I'm a sucker for vibrant graphics in RPGs, so this game immediately caught my attention. And speaking of the visuals, Stray Blade looks really similar to Dauntless, if you remember that game. But anyway, according to Point Blank Games, the studio behind this game, combat and exploration are the 2 key elements in Stray Blade. From all that I could see, it looks a bit linear for the exploration to be one of the key elements, but maybe I'm wrong. Even if it is linear, that's not so bad. I just think the exploration in linear games with tight corridors is not that exciting. On the other side, the environments look pretty damn good. Even though this art style is not extremely original, we could see a couple of very similar looking games before. But that doesn't matter a lot if you ask me. The game is obviously going for a more cartoony look, which will always age a lot better than realistic style of graphics. When it comes to the second major element, the combat looks pretty solid. It seems like it has a good pace to it, it's not too slow, but not really fast either. Animations seem to be well telegraphed, and they are going for more skill-based combat in general. They've described the combat as hyper-responsive, which is interesting. If that's actually the case, I expect to see some pretty good and responsive controls. The progression will be done in a traditional RPG manner. You have a skill tree and of course various gear pieces. Your companion also has a unique skill tree that's related to crafting. Oh yeah, the companion in this game seems to be really important. By the way, he looks really similar to mutants in Biomutant. Anyway, there are promising epic boss fights that will apparently have something to do with the exploration itself. Harvest their powers and use them to unravel the mysteries of Akria. New domains are waiting to be unlocked. Sounds interesting, but it could just mean that you have to kill the boss in order to progress further. I'm just guessing here, I don't know. Your actions are supposed to affect the world space, which means that you can go to previous visited places and experience the changes you brought to the world. That sounds really fancy, but it's probably related to some kind of a procedural generation, I guess. As you might have noticed, we don't have a ton of information about this game in general, so I have to speculate here a bit. Embark on an unforgettable journey and discover the story of Akria and its ancient legacy. Discover the whole history that turned this peaceful valley into a place of war and death. Use this knowledge to destroy the relics of the past and restore peace in a war-torn valley. That's everything we have about the story so far. It's obviously not the main focus of the game. That's pretty much everything we have about the game in general. Number 1. Edge of the Abyss Awakening. Edge of the Abyss Awakening is an adventure game that combines third-person, action, Middle Ages, roguelite random elements and RPG strategy selection? What? That's an interesting way to describe your game. This is another game that I'm featuring that has something to do with Awaken or Awakening. If you remember, I featured The Rise of Awakener in the previous video on the channel, and a lot of people thought the name of that game is kinda stupid. And I hate to say that I agree to some extent. However, Edge of the Abyss Awakening sounds a lot better if you ask me, but that's not so important. Anyway, this game looks pretty damn good. It has a fast-paced action combat system and we can see a lot of different enemies in the trailer. Actually, the combat in this game looks bloody amazing, to be honest. When you're willing to put out lengthy, uninterrupted gameplay footage in your trailers, you know that studio is not messing around. I really wish more studios will do this, instead of putting the cream of the crop 2-second clips of the gameplay in the trailer. The combat is obviously fast-paced, but not to the point where it becomes too flashy, at least it doesn't seem so. There is a huge variety of enemies in these trailers, and I suggest you to watch all of them on the Steam page because I won't be able to show everything here. The combat looks impactful and skill-based, and it has great sound effects for abilities, and just in general it looks really fun to play. Unfortunately, I won't be able to play the sound so you can hear the sound effects because of the music in the background. So the melee combat looks amazing, but what also caught my attention is the transformation magic or whatever it's called. We can see the player transforming in a couple of different creatures. I really think this kind of druid magic is not represented in RPGs that much, so I'm curious to see how that works. What I'm also curious about when it comes to this game is the co-op mode. Yeah, Edge of the Abyss has an online co-op and LAN co-op as well that can support up to 3 players. And I believe this footage shows the co-op play if this other character is not an NPC. Some of the boss fights have that Souls-like vibe, while others remind me of Monster Hunter but a lot more fast-paced. When it comes to some specific features, the game will have weapons with multiple entries and random talents suitable for the current weapon gameplay. I guess that Steam description is roughly translated, but it still gives you a good idea how the game is going to work. We can see some clips where the player gets to choose an ability or power boost, I guess, like in most roguelike games. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of are some of the menus in the game that kinda look like pay-to-win mobile games. I truly hope that's not the case, but I wouldn't be that surprised if it is. It would be a shame because the game looks amazing all around. If by some chance I get the opportunity to try it out, I will definitely make a dedicated video about it. If not, I'll try it out when it comes out because I really like the look of the gameplay. However, visually, the game has that generic Unreal Engine 4 look that we could see in other similar RPGs that I covered before. And there are probably some bought assets from the store that some people will recognize. I'm not entirely sure, but that's usually the case with these kinds of projects. The only time when that becomes a problem is when the game is an obvious asset flip, and I don't think that Edge of the Abyss fits that description. And that would be it for this video. Tell me your opinion about these games and which one do you like the most and why. Leave a comment down below. I'll keep my eye on all of these games and I'll probably cover at least some of them in my future videos, so stick around if you want to see that. I also do various content on the channel related to RPGs. Reviews, guides, tips, and various RPG topics, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. Don't forget to subscribe for more RPG contents. If you want to support the channel in the long run, consider becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. You can get your name on the end credits, as well as some other perks like early access to videos, Discord roles, my plans for future content, etc, etc. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.